Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You are joining us live in our virtual studio, live for the first Erasmus Alumni Lecture, a brand new event, online only, organized by and for alumni of Erasmus University Rotterdam. There are 130,000 alumni of us, and our aim is to provide you with new insights, perspectives, and food for thought on a monthly basis, starting today with 3 short lectures around one key theme, given by either alumni or researchers of this university. My name is Geert Maarsen. I once studied business administration and journalism studies here at this wonderful university. And today, of course, we dive into the American elections. 3 perspectives on what may very well be the most absurd elections in decades. The country, the United States, is more divided than ever by growing inequality, by the coronavirus, and let's be honest, by the actions of its own president, Donald Trump, at the moment. So how should we understand what's going on in the United States at the moment? Has Trump really done so bad? What to expect of Biden? Will he be doing better if he's chosen president on the 3rd of November in 2 weeks? And what can we expect for the future? Carlijn van Houweling is with us. She is a US correspondent for the Dutch daily newspaper Algemeen Dagblad. Odie Nijsing will share her thoughts on whether a woman will once be president, or with Kamala Harris, vice president of the United States, and why this is still such a sheer impossible thing to achieve. And last but not least, Mark Schipper, once a student of business administration at Erasmus University and now a trend watcher, will give us a glimpse of the future by profiling possible future presidents of the US, which includes talking about someone like the Honorable Mr. Kanye West. They will each give a lecture for 12 minutes, followed by a Q&A led by myself. And please send in your questions as well, and we will try to incorporate them in the discussion. You can do that by, during the lecture, going to menti.com and entering the code 814-7647. Having said that, it's an honor to introduce our first keynote speaker. She once studied sociology at what used to be the Faculteit Sociale Wetenschappen, now called the Erasmus School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and she is the New York-based correspondent in the US for one of the largest Dutch daily newspapers, Algemeen Dagblad. And with us, she will discuss the best practices of the 4 years Trump presidency, answer the questions: has he been successful in these 4 years? Has he lived up to the expectations? And what will the consequences of the economic recession due to the COVID crisis be with regards to the possibilities of him being re-elected in a couple of weeks? Please welcome Carlijn van Houweling.
Good morning, speaking from New York. Good afternoon in Europe, in the Netherlands. Erasmus asked me to speak about the successes of the Trump administration, and for that, I'd like to start with a concern that many American voters had in 2016 about this man that you see here on my left. I think it's something that has been overlooked. In 2016, a significant part of American voters thought that the US had become too soft and too feminine under Obama. And if you think about traditionally feminine and masculine behaviors, Obama was a relatively feminine president. You may remember, as you can see in this photo, his tears live on TV when he talked about victims of gun violence, or how he talked about his family life, reading bedtime stories to his daughters. And this image of him as a family man, while some Americans wanted him to stand up to Iran, stand up to enemies, it led to 4 out of 10 voters complaining in polls that the US had become too soft. And that sentiment was particularly very strong under Trump voters. More than 2/3 of them agreed with that statement. I touched on this in my book. It's called Dit is America, this is America. It's about sex and gender in the US. And one of the elements is how central masculinity is to the American presidency. You can see it happening in the debates. The candidates are trying to prove that they are a real man, prove their manliness. One of the worst things that can be said about a presidential candidate is that you're soft on crime or weak on defense, because that's what a significant portion of the American population is looking for when they are voting for a presidential candidate: a bodyguard, a protector. And one of the things that Trump has successfully done is playing into that desire for a strong masculine leader. Trump has always played that game. I'll show you some images. The one on the left is an image that he shared himself on his Twitter account. So gives you an indication of what he's trying to portray. The others come from his supporters. They're all over the internet. Recently, you may have seen how he talks about him getting infected with coronavirus. It's all about beating the virus, bravely defeating the virus, confronting it head on, and not being afraid of it. Of course, you can argue about how strong it actually makes someone look, ignoring medical advice. But this image of the macho president worked very well for Donald Trump in 2016. And he's clearly betting that it can be a successful strategy again in 2020. So if we speak about successes of the Trump administration, I think this is one of the successful strategies that he operated. If we think about success in the sense of accomplishment, though I thought it was an interesting assignment from Erasmus in the middle of multiple level crisis on the economy. There's a health crisis going on with more than 200,000 deaths in the US, social unrest, climate crisis in the West. Democracy is under pressure. It seems pretty hopeless sometimes, I must say. Recently, that mood took me on a trip to 10 towns called Hope in 10 different states all over the US. It took me to small town USA because most of these towns called Hope are small. And what I heard over and over again from people who are planning to vote for Trump is that Trump is the one who gives them hope in these uncertain times. I think that's one of the remarkable things. Let me change the slide. Yes, you can see it here. The support for Donald Trump has actually been remarkably strong. This is his approval rating, so the percentage of Americans that says they think he's doing a good job as president. And even now in the pandemic that most Americans think he's not handling very well, there is a pretty stable group that still supports him. You can see here that he starts with a little more than 40%. He is still at a little more than 40% support. So he's been very successful in keeping his supporters behind him. It helps that the US is very polarized. People don't see members of the other party or people who vote for the other party as just citizens with another opinion. They're seen as the enemy, as danger. So yeah, that of course makes it easier to keep your people on your side. But there's also some things that Trump has successfully done. We tend to forget them in the chaos we see unfold nowadays. So I'd like to highlight some of them. You may note that they are relatively small. The big peace deal with North Korea that he promised never came, for example. But Donald Trump did manage to make NATO members pay more for their defense. The Secretary General credited Donald Trump, and this is something that the US has wanted for a long time. There is trade, where he renegotiated NAFTA, a big trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. Even Joe Biden acknowledged recently that the new agreement is better than what used to be there. China, there's a lot of animosity, a lot of tension, but Donald Trump did manage to get to a phase one deal, as it was called, where China agreed to buy more American agricultural products. We have to see if this all comes true because of the pandemic. It may not actually happen as it was negotiated, but for Trump supporters, this is something that they credit him for. They see that there was a result. Hostages, I think that's a very symbolically important one. Trump has managed to get some American hostages home from abroad, and especially the families of those people credit him for doing more than Barack Obama. And that's, of course, something that Trump is using. You can see it in the image. He invited those hostages to the White House to send the footage of that to voters during the national convention of the Republican Party. The Middle East, we've seen some positive developments there recently. Israel normalized relations with two Arab states. The Trump administration does deserve credit for quietly helping to negotiate that deal. There have been some pretty disastrous moves as well, abandoning the Kurds, for example. But when American voters look at the big picture, they also see that the leader of ISIS was taken out, and then ISIS lost a lot of its territory, or most of its territory. And then the economy, that's a big one. I hear that a lot from Trump supporters. But if you look at the numbers in the polls, Americans still trust Trump more than Biden to handle the economy. And that's based on rosy numbers from before the pandemic. The economy was doing well, people remember that. And they hope that he can bring that back. You can, of course, argue about that because you could say that the dire situation was more dire economically because of the way Trump did not get the pandemic under control. He inherited part of that upbeat economy from the Obama administration, but those good times are still on the minds of American voters. Then there is criminal justice reform. It's an important one. The US locks up more people in prison than any country in the world. And Trump is the president who signed a law that makes some important changes, relatively small but important. Reduced sentences, for example, for people who got really harsh sentences for relatively minor crimes. That's something that benefits mostly the Black community in the US because they are the group that bears the brunt of mass incarceration, as it's called. So this is definitely appreciated. And there is one big accomplishment that I think kind of makes conservative Americans forget about everything else what happened during the Trump administration. Filling the courts. Trump has been filling the American courts with conservative judges, especially in powerful appeals courts. So that's right under the Supreme Court. He has been appointing people at a pace that hasn't been seen since the 70s. You can see in the graphic that he appointed about the same number of judges as Obama in 2 terms. He only has 1 term so far. It means that 30% now of the judges in those appeals courts is a conservative appointed by Trump. It seems at the moment that he's also going to be able to appoint a 3rd Supreme Court judge. So that means that also a 3rd out of 9 Supreme Court judges will be a conservative appointed by Trump. He appoints young judges, remarkably young people, and they serve for life. So this rightward shift can last for decades. The judges he appoints interpret the Constitution in a very literal way as it was written in its time. So most of those judges are thought to be sympathetic to opposing abortion, for example, to give businesses free range and to be very pro-religion. And that's part of the reason that Republicans and conservative Americans tend to accept a lot from Donald Trump. The guy on the right is Mitch McConnell. He is the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. This is, well, his wet dream, you could say. Whatever else happened, in this sense, for conservatives, the presidency of Donald Trump has been a big success. They have influenced the course of the country for decades to come. If that's desirable, that's another question. You may not think it is, but for a significant portion of Trump's voters, it is. That's what I wanted him to do. So that's the bottom line here, that there are real accomplishments, especially from the perspective of Trump supporters who have seen him do what they wanted him to do. The question, I think, is mostly how they weigh both sides of the story, accomplishments versus failures. Because, of course, the failures are also there. The broken promises, the social unrest, the pandemic that got out of control, the more than 200,000 Americans that have passed away after an infection, economic trouble. That's the question voters are going to answer. How do they weigh accomplishment versus failure? I think if he loses, you could say that he himself blew it. He was definitely on a path to re-election earlier this year. The economy was doing great, and that was one of his strongest. It was his strongest argument, and everything collapsed, of course, because the pandemic hit, and that's not his fault, but he could have done more to get it under control in a way that would maybe not have affected the economy as it has done that now. I know people like to predict. I get that question a lot. Who do you think is going to win? I learned there is little value in prediction in 2016. Joe Biden has a good position. He's doing well. It seems most likely that Joe Biden will win, but Donald Trump is absolutely still an important contender, and he still has a good chance to end up as a re-elected president. The only poll that counts, is what they say, is the poll on election day, and I think we learned 4 years ago that that's how we should look at it. We'll have to see on November 3rd. If anyone has questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Your talk on the weighing accomplishments versus the failures of Trump, and for giving us a sort of overview in that. One of the promises he made, or one of the, I think, the expectancies was, even from the Trump skeptics, was that he would do something. He would place America first. He would do something about the American economy. He would do something about jobs, and he would do something about the American infrastructure, for example. To what extent did he? And what do Americans think about his accomplishments in that area?
If you speak about infrastructure, for example, that was actually one of the very few topics where the left and the right agree in the US. The American infrastructure is really not in good shape. You can see it with your own eyes if you drive through the country or drive through New York even. Trump announced big plans, $1 trillion he was going to spend, he said. So far, nothing has happened. Part of the reason is that he quit negotiating with the Democrats because they were investigating him. He didn't want to work with the Democrats anymore on infrastructure. So he dropped it because of his personal anger towards the Democrats. I think that has not been a very smart move, because infrastructure is something that affects everyone, and nothing has really changed there. People see that, of course. They do see that nothing has happened there.
Yeah, you started out talking about Obama and saying that at least a number of Americans thought he was too feminine, too soft in his approach, especially in geopolitics. How has the emotion towards the Obama administration changed with having had 4 years of Trump in the White House among Americans? Are there a lot of people who are looking back filled with nostalgia?
Yes, there's a lot of nostalgia, and I think Joe Biden is trying to exploit that or use that to his advantage. His whole candidacy is basically nostalgia for the Obama administration.
Yeah.
It may work because the Trump administration has been such a wild ride that a lot of Americans are tired of it.
Yeah,
They
but do
want
you really think
stability.
that Joe Biden still has can he profit from the Obama aura because he's a number of years older? He's white, and Obama is not his VP as he used to be for Obama. So how much can he profit from that? Do you think?
He can. One of the reasons that he is not the only reason, but one of the reasons that he is doing very well in the Black community here in the US is that they see him as the guy who worked with Obama, with the first Black president, and that definitely gives him credits there. Of course, now he is the front runner. People dig into his record, into his voting history, into there's more focus on him personally. But there's a reason that Barack Obama is going to campaign him in the last week, going to campaign for him in the last couple of weeks, because the Democrats definitely think that they can still take advantage of the image of the Obamas, both of them, not only Barack Obama, but also Michelle Obama. They're very popular figures.
Let's take some questions from the viewers. One of them is where Joe Biden is on the scale of masculinity, and how will this affect his battle for the presidency?
That's a good question. I think Joe Biden is also he's an interesting figure because on the one hand he's someone who talks a lot about loss in his family. Loss has defined his life. He lost his first wife and his baby daughter when he was 30 years old. Later, he lost his adult son to cancer. And he's very empathetic. He connects with people, especially when they also lost someone in their lives. And of course, a lot of people deal with that on a personal level. On the one hand, you see him. On the other hand, you see him in getting into these masculine fights with Donald Trump, where he once said, for example, that he would beat him up behind the school as if they were schoolboys. So he definitely tries to play that game with Donald Trump and tries to get ahead of him there.
Mm-hmm.
I think if one of the reasons, if Joe Biden wins, where Hillary Clinton couldn't win when she ran against Donald Trump, then one of the reasons is that Joe Biden is a man and can play that masculinity game, and Hillary Clinton couldn't.
Beat him up on the schoolyard. Yeah. One other question: how do you think that the Trump's infection with coronavirus has affected his campaign and Biden's campaign, and consequently will affect the polls and ultimately the elections on the 3rd of November?
That was, I would say, very bad for Trump's campaign. You can see it in the polls that the gap between Trump and Biden at the moment is getting bigger, which doesn't always have to mean that that's going to be the result in the election. But it meant that the focus was on Trump's coronavirus response again, and it made the election a referendum about the way he handled the pandemic. And we know from polls that most Americans don't think he handled it well. So the more the campaign is about COVID, the worse that is for Donald Trump.
Yeah. So nobody bought his speech on the in front of the White House saying, "I beat the coronavirus and I will make the medicine I got available for every one of you." And so being the big masculine leader that fought for the American public, you are saying that the American public didn't buy it.
I wouldn't say nobody, because I was traveling around the country through rural areas where Donald Trump is very popular, and he's still popular with lots of people there. You can see it in his approval ratings. It is a minority. It's a little bit more than 40% of people, but there is about 40% of Americans think he's doing a good job. The question now, if they're still thinking that in the last weeks before the election, but I met lots of people in the last couple of weeks who feel that the pandemic is not something you can blame the president for, because no one knows how to deal with a pandemic. That's something very new. We all had to adjust to that, is what they say. And they like the cheerleading approach that Donald Trump takes. He has said that he wants to be a cheerleader for the economy, for the country to get back on its feet. There is definitely a group of Americans that does appreciate that.
Yeah. Carlijn, thank you very much for being with us. Good luck in the next weeks. Will you be having a vacation after the 3rd of November, or will the real job finally start then as a US correspondent?
I'm afraid the real job will start after the 3rd of November. We'll have to see.
Okay.
If one of those candidates wins in a landslide, it may all be very clear, but there is a good chance that we're going to see a lot of debate and discussion and legal challenges about the results of the election.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being there on behalf of us. Carlijn van Houwelingen, thank you.
Thank you.
Next. And 3, and she's currently responsible for public affairs at Women Inc. Odie Nysing is also the author of the yet-to-be-released children's book, My Mother is a Prime Minister. In her lecture, Odie will speak about the possibility that the United States of America will get their first female vice president if Joe Biden gets elected, and about the question why so very few people believe that women could successfully fulfill the position of vice president or president of the United States. Odie Nysing.
Hi. My name is Odie Nysing. And for many years I've worked in politics or with politicians, mostly advocating for women's rights. And at the moment, I work for Women Inc. Topics I've been advocating is comprehensive sex education in all schools at all ages, access to legal abortion, or, for example, the paternity leave extension in the Netherlands. And as a lobbyist, I've worked in the wings of politics, nice and steady in the shade. But last year, my director, he asked me whether I would be interested in a political career myself instead of solely advising or working in the background. And yeah, wow, that comment brought a lot of turmoil. Lots of different questions in my mind, like, can I see myself as a political leader? Do I dare to do that? Do I want it? And am I able? And to give a bit more insight in how a woman, and this woman being myself with a sample size of 1, of course, thinks, these are the questions that were circulating in the back of my mind. Like, am I 100% certain that I am qualified? What sacrifices do I have to make towards my family? Can I still be a good mother working in politics? And also, what will my friends, mostly my girlfriends, think about me and my motherhood? And will my partner support me? And how many sexual remarks am I ready to withstand? And most of all, do I have enough power to swim at least some parts of the road against the current? Well, Kamala Harris decided to swim against the current in 2015. And she has been assigned as Joe Biden's running mate for the presidential elections of 2020, which makes her the 3rd female candidate vice president of the United States of America, with the chance to be the first female vice president. And by doing so, this could be a great leap forward for the sake of the democracy of the United States, because diversity, which includes a better men-to-women ratio, improves the way that a democracy works. We know that by the scientific research. For example, it improves the acceptance of the elections and the feeling of social justice and cohesion in a society, and it shows everyone is participating. But, the great but. According to the World Economic Forum, in the current pace of change, it will take almost 100 years before the global men-to-women ratio is equal. 1 in 5 ministers is female, not even 3 out of 10 parliamentarians worldwide. And we count 21 female heads of state out of 195. In the international rankings of women in parliament, the Netherlands, ranks 41st. And the ratio is 2 male to 1 female, so twice as much men. So, what about the States? What do you think? What will they rank? Will they rank better or worse than the Netherlands? Well, they come in at the 87th place, after countries like Iraq, Cuba, Belarus, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Mexico, and the most of Europe. About half of the countries have had at least once a female political leader. The Germans had Angela Merkel. The English had Thatcher and recently May. Our Belgian neighbors, Sophie Wilmès. But the Netherlands and the United States have never had in their entire history a female president. Queens, we had lots of them, but prime ministers, no. We did have female vice presidents in the Netherlands. The first one once started their position in the year 1998. Anyone who knows who they are? Els Borst from D66 and Annemarie Jorritsma from VVD. But still, in the 22 years after their first appearance, there have not really been women who had a serious chance of becoming prime minister. Well, wait a second. There is a woman in the Netherlands who was a secret prime minister. Maria Laberia Peter. She was the political leader of the Dutch Antilles. So it is possible. But why is it that there has never been a woman achieving the seat in the Oval Office? Besides, of course, Elizabeth Keane in the Homeland series or Claire Underwood in the House of Cards. Gender and unconscious gender bias do play a bigger role than you would initially think. Gender bias, of course, occurs when you unconsciously attribute certain attitudes and stereotypes to another person or another group. Sigrid Kaag, for example, she announced earlier this year that she would like to become the first Dutch female prime minister as a candidate for D66. And she has been immediately greeted with these kind of articles in the newspapers. Translated, is Sigrid tough enough to become our first prime minister? Kaag doubted her nomination. What am I doing to my children? Kaag, ex-diplomat, still needs to get used to the Netherlands. Working in parliament will be beneath Kaag. In short, arrogant, a bad mother, inexperienced, and not a good, or at least a tough leader. Please try and be honest. Have you ever experienced one of these thoughts while she was still a candidate or with another woman being put up for a leadership role? Maybe Femke Halsema going for major, Hillary Clinton running for president. Thoughts like too nice or not nice enough, too tough or not tough enough. We all tend to be more critical towards women than towards men. And this critique comes mostly because we do not recognize the image of the female leader. And on the news, you see lots of an over-representation of white middle-aged men as leaders. And we need our brains to create order in chaos, in the chaos of our world. So we create shortcuts. And these are stereotypical images. And because we are unfamiliar with the female leader image, we tend to think, subconsciously of course, that these uncommon leadership styles must be wrong or ineffective. Stereotypical masculine traits such as strength of leadership, toughness, quick decision-making are often prized over stereotypical feminine traits like deliberation, empathy, and compromise. The women candidates are aware of this and often spend a significant amount of time implementing strategies to offset potential stereotypes. These include emphasizing their strength and their capacity to lead in a masculine way and quick decision-making. And for some female leaders, you could ask the question if they adapted somehow that masculine type of leadership along the way, or if they possessed certain masculine traits as a woman that made it easier for them to achieve their leadership. Hillary Clinton has also spoken about how deep-rooted the sexism played a hand in her defeat and about the double standards she faced. And maybe good to state that sexism playing a role in the US 2016 election is not just a good feeling by Hillary herself. It has been found by scientific research as well. Research found that sexist attitudes contributed to some voters' decision to vote for Trump instead of Clinton. Most of us know that Trump enjoyed an advantage among non-college educated whites, and that advantage was nearly 40 points. Racial attitudes and sexism explain at least 2/3 of the education gap among white voters in the 2016 presidential election. And unfortunately, this has not changed in the past 4 years. For Kamala Harris, being a woman is still being used against her. On the campaign trail, she has taken on that question of electability head on, telling audiences, I have faith in the American people to know we will never be burdened by assumptions of who can do what based on who historically has done it. And she, as a Black woman, even has an extra hurdle to take. McKinsey found that 40% of Black women had their judgment questioned in their area of expertise in professional settings, compared to 27% of all men. Black women leaders are evaluated more negatively than any other gender or racial group, So there we are. That brings us to the question, what do we, the Dutch and the American people, what do we need to do to get that female into office? Not just as a vice president, but also as the president, and in general, to get more diversity in all offices. Well, first of them, vote for them. In the Netherlands, stem op een vrouw. And I would say it starts with our public opinion. So be explicitly critical about your own opinion and your own shortcuts in your brain. Question them rationally. Would I be saying this or thinking this if it was a man? And also, we need to make it more appealing for women to get into politics. For example, on the local level, digital meetings in the evenings to make sure that single parents also can join. And make it also safe for women to enter. Make solid plans to fight sexual intimidation and violence against female politicians. 85% of the female European parliamentarians suffer from violence, mostly online, with online attacks and even death threats. So, and make sure enough women run for office. There needs to be active recruitment for women and also different genders. Just ask them, encourage them to run. Little girls at the age of 8 already underestimate themselves. And same goes for grown-up women. They need an extra push. Someone who says, I see a political talent in you. And make sure that new female role models emerge. When you grow up in Finland, you see a 34-year-old prime minister managing the country. But here and in the States, you grow up with the image that these are jobs done by men. And create an environment where, in general, create an environment where little girls can think, hey, politics, that might be something for me. And to repeat an earlier statement, this does not only lead to a more just society, it improves our democracy in many more ways. And train women also about unconscious bias and sexism. Let them hear this story and let them be prepared for it. And the bonus, if you start recruiting women, you also pave the way for other diverse candidates, whether it be because of sexual orientation, culture, religion, or color. I see in Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, one of the few prime ministers who makes use of the strength of the feminine trait for leadership. It is possible. So, she brought her 3-month-old baby to the United Nations General Assembly. And in 2019, after a dreadful terrorist attack on the Muslim community, she held a press conference as an agnostic to deliver a message that will bring her citizens together, uniting them. They are us, she said about the victims. And she was praised for that in the press for excellent leadership. And the big question now this week isn't whether she will win this weekend a second term for her party, but if her party will make history by becoming the first to secure an absolute majority under the current political system. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, another example. She is approachable. She comes from the working class. She's strongly dedicated to building relationships. She is very feminine, talks about makeup, but can be a pit bull as well. And she has everything you would not imagine thinking of as a traditional member of Congress. And she is definitely prepared to tackle sexism she knows how to deal with it. For example, when she started to dance in Congress and posted that on socials after a shame video was posted in an attempt to put her down. And in fact, we have arrived at a moment in time where the prejudices could be flipped around. I mean, in the global pandemic COVID-19, there are arguments that the feminine traits could result in better leadership dealing with it. Countries like Germany, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Norway, they are outperforming in pandemic control and have female leaders. Coincidence? Unfortunately, the sample is too small, but it raises the question, could women maybe even be better leaders? And the other question that comes up next is whether the traits we as a society have marked as super important for leaders are chosen because they are important traits for leaders, and these traits often pair with men, or whether the traits have been marked as super important because they are commonly found in our leaders that have mostly been men. Either way, women should be proud of their leadership style. And role models like Alexandra, Sigrid, Jacinda, and Kamala are extremely important in resetting our stereotypical image of a leader. And also for helping women like me with high standards for themselves to make it easier to think, yeah, I mean, I can do that. Why not? And if she can, why can't I? And this is also why I am writing a children's book right now at the moment called My Mother is Prime Minister. And it's about a young boy with a superhero mother who is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And it's because it's to give new generations a different image of the stereotypical idea of a president, to read it with kids, while we, in the meantime, of course, wait for our first actual Dutch female Prime Minister. So last thing to say is please vote and vote for gender equality. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Odie Nijsing. If I may start with our first question from the audience, why do you think, Odie, it is that the United States and the Netherlands both have such, you might say, an old-fashioned or masculine approach or view of leadership?
Yeah, that's funny because we tend to think, both in the US as in the Netherlands, that we are very, very emancipated. But for example, in the Netherlands, we have a very strong motherhood culture, for example, and women tend to work not very much hours a week. For example, we have a part-time culture, and so there are some cultural beliefs we have about women that are stronger in our culture than in other cultures like Sweden or even France or Belgium, surrounding cultures. And the same goes for the US.
Yeah. Another question from the audience is whether female voters have the preference for a female leader.
Yeah, well, you would expect it. This year we did a research about it in the Netherlands with Women Inc. And we asked voters if they would vote for another party than their first preference, if it would have a female leader. And 1 million voters would do that. That sounds a lot, but still a lot of people would not change party for a woman as a leader. But what we found is that 8 million people did change or at least consider gender equality and the plans that a party has about gender equality. That would change their mind. So that really is taken into consideration. So I think the policy plans are more important than who is running the party.
Yeah.
And actually, you see that both men and women said the same about choosing for another party. It didn't make any difference.
Who would you have wanted to be on the ticket as a female presidential candidate in this election race?
Well, I think in my ideal world, it would be Michelle Obama.
Really?
She ticks all the boxes. I mean, she's a woman. She is like Jacinda Ardern and AOC Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. She is feminine. She uses her female traits and her female power. So yeah, I think she would be perfect. So maybe in 4 years, as
Maybe,
the president, she could be
yeah.
the first real president.
Yeah, you showed some you talked about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Would she be an ideal candidate for 4 years, 8 years, 12 years ahead? What do you think?
Well, my personal opinion, I think she could be that. Yeah, she could be the president because she is the real American dream. She is working class. She she made her way up, but she's also a little bit activistic. So maybe too much of a pit bull. So um, if she softens a bit on that part, she might be a real candidate. Yeah, why not?
Okay. We're talking about the first Dutch female prime minister in relation to the book that's coming out. If it was up to you, who would it be? The first female prime minister of the Netherlands?
Well, I see in Sigrid Kaag a very powerful candidate. Um, I think she is very inspiring. A lot of women around me see in her a role model, and she is. I don't know. She's for me. She touches me. So yeah,
Maybe it will happen. Thanks for being with us,
yeah. You never
Odinij.
know.
Our next and our last keynote speaker has a master's degree in business administration at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He is now a futurist, a trend watcher, professional speaker, and the founder of Freshmark. In his lecture, he will share his vision on the profile of future American presidential candidates, and he will answer the question whether the Honorable Mr. Kanye West will ever be a president of the United States of America, what's in store for us, and how crazy can it get? Mark Schipper.
Hi there, very much welcome and great to be here for Erasmus University doing this presentation. I will take you along to indeed the profile of the future American president. You know, what would it be for our future? As stated, I'm doing trend research. That's my professional job. And the most important thing I want to share with you is the sentence on the left-hand side. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And it's actually a sentence of Abraham Lincoln. And for me, it's very important how you want to approach future. Is it something you just wait and see to happen and make the best of it? Or do you acknowledge you can make future yourself? For those companies and persons, I'm really a person to help them with. I have a variety of clients I'm working for. I tend to translate society trends for them in more appropriate new business, either for Red Bull on petrol stations or for Funda how Dutch people find their house in the future, or for a city in Amsterdam to create a real future room on how the city will look like and let people experience that and make something of it. But yeah, profile of the future American president. How would it look like? Well, let me first take you to a disclaimer about the future. I have to state, by doing now for 15 years research in future, the future paints bright and dark colors alike. It's not that the future is a one-way direction. Just look at today. We'll have a society which has different colors depending your context or perception on it. So that also is for the new future president. That's why I choose two profiles for you to present. But before I come to the profiles, I always tend to look first at the past, you know, the US presidential system. The first president of the United States, George Washington on the left, 1789, already from the beginning, it showed that this system in the United States was a very executive power system. All the power controlled by the president. And also from the beginning, there were two parties actually getting this power, or at least voted for that. And when a new president came into office, a lot of senior officials came in office as well. So what happens if you think about the old ABBA song, the winner takes it all? That's the big thing in the United States, two parties, and when you lose really everything. So you really want to do everything that takes it to win. And all along all those presidents we have had so far, we had, for instance, Ronald Reagan, for the ones who recognize him, an actor from Hollywood who became president of the United States. So from him, it is not that big step to Trump, where we are now currently, Mr. Alternative, Mr. Outsider. Trump could really got into the office because a lot of American people are sort of not pleased with the present political situation. They long for something different, something better for them, and they don't care. And then for them, it's very important to choose someone that's very confident about what he wants to do and convincing as well. And then, yes, the future profile, job profile of the American president. How could you define it? I would like to take you along to two trends of the six trends I'm working on. This feminization and polarizing life. I think those two trends are really defining the future profile of the American president. First, about polarizing life. It's a trend that's going on for quite some years, even long before Trump came into the office. This London subway sign really says it all. It's mind the gap, because that's what's really happening in society. There's more that takes us apart, that binds us in society. Think of fake news. It's something that has been there for ages, but nowadays fake news is very strong, and we call it even alternative facts. Polarizing life is occurring at many aspects in life. Of course, it's Trump. It's also a Brexit. It's a broadening gap between the young and the old, especially the baby boomers who have a very good lives at the moment, and the young people ask themselves, will we have such a life as well? As a pension conflict. Then there's a growing gap between high and low educated people. This being high educated is nowadays a ticket to the tropics to really make it, and there's a life expectancy gap which is growing between high and low educated people. And finally, also between the rural areas and the metropolitan areas, the gap is growing, and how people think and vote. And let me take you a little bit to the American middle class. This is a typical picture of the end of 60s, beginning of 70s, when the middle class was at its heyday, and there was some 61% of society was middle class. And nowadays it's shrunk to 49%. And middle class, it's very important to notice, is the class that likes to vote for moderation, for compromise, because they're having a great time and they want to continue it. But because this middle class is shrinking and lower class is bigger, they have not so much to lose. They want a different president. They want more a president who breaks the present condition and makes it better for them. You also see a polarizing life occurring in the broadcasting area. CNN, typically a broadcasting company for the Democratic voters, and Fox for the Republican voters. The two shall not meet. That's really the case right now. And of course, if you've been looking at the streets on television in the United States last months, we have seen quite some protests on the street. And this is what is really going on right now. We have a president in the United States that's actually fueling extreme parties to meet each other on the street. Either it be Black Lives Matter, longing for more solidarity in society, or Proud Boys, more for the identity part. Those two are really on the extreme side. They have their momentum and they are very important in the current situation. And then a small step, there's now a businessman in the White House. And that means that politics came also into business. Large companies in the United States, but also in the Western world, can no longer sit aside and just sell their shoes like Nike does to everyone. They have to make a stand in some issues like Black Lives Matter. They did so with this guy, Colin Kaepernick, American football player, who refused to stand up during the national anthem was played in the United States. And he got a sponsorship for Nike, and because Nike wants to stand out on this issue. So all those polarizing things, where does it take us? The first profile I want to share with you is this one, is thriving on chaos. This is really what's going on. Polarizing life creates more chaos in society, and the person who can thrive on that really can win. That brings me to the first profile. I really believe there is a possibility of getting a dynasty. And we've had some in the past in the United States, of course, the Bushes and the Kennedys. But this is another kind of dynasty. Look at the background. Yeah? It's a family of Trump, but in a Roman Empire style. It says something about who they are, where they're from. They're above in the clouds. They make their own rules, don't have to obey the rules, and are untouchable. Then continue to the second profile. It's fueled by the trend feminization. This trend is not only about salary differences between men and women or the Me Too affairs, it's really about the female values that are getting more important in our society. And I'm talking about the quality, network, intuition, and long term, as opposed to the male values. And it's also thinking of your school time with economics, the gross domestic product. It's not only hard figures, but sometimes we also need other measurements to really assess whether a country is rich. Does it have good access to education or healthcare, for instance? And this feminization, just to take you along, because I can make a more broader presentation about this, is in many fields of society, for instance, in architecture. Thanks to 3D printing, buildings don't have to be anymore very straight on. They can have any form you like and very organic in form. Feminization is also about getting customers first, but also the employees who are most close to the customers also first. Give them more responsibility, and the CEO is more a facilitator in this. And feminization, not to forget, is a trend also that's fueling the minority matters, the inclusiveness in society, and that everyone matters as fact. We have a gender mix-up going between man and woman. Of course, we are not the same species, but we tend to overlap more and more in society. And there was a campaign last year from Gillette, the best a man can get. You see that how men are actually changing as well. In this campaign, Gillette promotes men that also take care of inclusive thoughts and a green planet as well. So that brings me to the second profile, and I want to bring it in this sentence of the quality of life. Actually, this is something about not the hard figure about how much you own or how much you consume. It's more the quality of what you own, and the quality of what you consume is getting more important. And to give this profile a picture, I use this Mrs. Apfel, a businesswoman and a fashion icon. Could have also used Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey, of course. But I want to state with this profile that the future power woman will be a very colorful woman. Because don't forget that the 21st century is a century of China, but as well a century of women. And this will be a woman that really takes care of this quality of life and tries to be hard on polarization issues. All right. Thank you so much for the attention. I'm very curious whether there are any questions.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. Yes, indeed, we have received a number of questions. But first, if I may sort of connect your talk to the talk of the other keynote speakers, you all touched upon themes as diversity, inclusion, and feminization. Still, we have two guys on the ticket that are in their 70s and both white. What should we think of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, we still have Kamala Harris, a woman as vice president, and
but in a time where diversity and inclusion are so important, why is the most important job in the world about to be filled by a guy, white guy, and a really old white guy?
Well, it's something that puzzles me as well. But at the same time, this is what is reality at the moment. But I still believe that perhaps not at this presidential election, but at the next one to come, more women will be more visible on higher positions and getting for the ticket. I really believe that this will be something for the coming, 10 years. to be more important. So this might be the last election where we have two old white men, very aged, and I really believe that there will be more younger women coming up.
It might be sort of a backlash of a culture that is sort of losing it. The question from the audience: will we have a future president of the US after 4 more years of Trump, or will the US break up before that?
In a sense of breakup, not exist anymore, or
I think so. The civil war or total.
Yeah, I presented this first profile as a sort of dynasty, and it can, in a way, like Trump already stated, that he doesn't like to lose. He doesn't like to hand in power. He's a guy that is addicted to power. So it can either be a sort of dynasty that comes into power on a soft way, but will never leave the stage, or it could be a sort of a war. Indeed, if people are really opposed to it, and I think a lot of people are opposed to Trump, so it's really how it works out, how well they can perform on stage and control everything what's important to getting in power. But it's not a family that hands in power very easily.
Okay. Another question. What actors in American society do you think got the most benefits from the last 4 years of the Trump presidency?
What actors?
Yeah. So what layers in society which were the business people who profited most, the rich people that profited most?
I think so. It's good that you elaborate on that. I really think that on that account, while Trump is actually promising the lower class to make their lives better, to make America great again, I think he's doing far more for the rich and wealthy and the business owners. If you look at the tax cuts he has been doing the last years. So to be honest, if you really look at the figures, I think he's doing more for people who already have quite some good money on the bank. Yeah.
And this question is a sort of in relation, I think, to your work as a trend watcher. In terms of research and data on this topic, do you think that you could predict what individual or individuals are most likely to make it to the presidential tickets in the future?
Well, that's no, really an individual person, that's very difficult. But like a sort of wave of what's getting more important, these two profiles are really extremes from each other. It's like the one is really like, do we embrace a dynasty because it's all chaos and we need some strong men? First, the other one, the quality of life, it's far more being equal and exclusive. Is another way of doing politics. So I can indeed give a prediction on the wave, on the trend, but the specific person, for me, to be honest, Trump was a surprise as well. I've had this polarization trend before he came into office, but even I was amazed by his coming onto stage. So that proves that life is always very special in the end.
Yeah. Last question. It's often said that a lot of trends in the United States sooner or later will end up in Europe and in the Netherlands. Would you say that your analysis can be transferred to the Dutch situation?
Yes, certainly. And you're right that the United States is also Britain is ahead of us in certain trends, but not all trends. There are trends that are, for instance, robotization. You see South Korea and Japan moving faster. On feminization, it's the Scandinavian countries are faster. But those trends that I'm working on, they really apply to the Netherlands as well. Certainly, yeah, we have polarization going on as well, but we have another political system that doesn't allow two parties to rule. That is our safeguard, actually, that we have these multiple parties.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being with us. Mark Schipper.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks again to our 3 alumni, Carlijn van Houwelingen, Odie Nijssing, and Mark Schipper, for their interesting talks. Thank you for your generous handing in of questions. There were about 50 of them, so we couldn't handle all of them, but we will try to answer them in the next couple of days. The next Erasmus Alumni Lecture will take place on Thursday, the 26th of November, and will be, of course, about the future after this pandemic. Professor Mary Pieterse-Bloem will share her view on the future of our economy. We will have a talk by Arne van Vliet, a cultural and creative fundraising expert, and he will discuss the future of the cultural sector. And Margot van Mol, postdoctoral researcher at the Erasmus Medical Center, will be with us to share her research on the future of our healthcare workers and their well-being. Also, an event of Erasmus University next Tuesday, Studio Erasmus in the Rotterdamse Schouwburg, Dutch only, with, among others, Professor of Theology and Economy Paul van Geest on the need for economic reform. Don't forget to sign up for our next Erasmus Alumni Lecture. Thank you a lot for watching, and see you next month.